Hey guys, this story doesn't start with honor, or fear, or even dignity. It starts with you squinting at a dull axe, trying to figure out if it hates you as much as everyone else does. The blade doesn't gleam, it sulks. The handle splinters at the worst angle, and in a few minutes, you're expected to make this piece of sulking iron look like justice. The crowd wants drama. The magistrate wants precision. All you have is an axe that cuts cheese better than it cuts necks. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up to the sound of your name being shouted like a curse hurled through a window. It's not the kind of shout that asks if you want bread or inquires sweetly after your health. It's the kind of shout that carries panic, disappointment, and a bit of phlegm. You sit up too fast, hit your head on the underside of the roof beam, and knock over the bucket you don't remember placing there. Something splashes. You sincerely hope it was water. It smells like regret. You blink blearily into the dim, smoky light of your single-room cottage, which smells of damp straw and the faintly burnt toast of old decisions. A rooster crows outside, late and unapologetic. The floor is wet. The cat is sitting on your axe again, tail flicking in that judgmental way cats have when they've claimed something and dare you to object. You try to reach for the axe. The cat hisses and flattens its ears. You decide not to fight a creature with claws and a god complex before breakfast. Your hood is missing. Again, you search under the bed. 2 boots, 1 rat, 1 sock that may or may not have once belonged to a nobleman. Then behind the firewood pile, a dead beetle, a live spider, and a small scroll with the word "Why" written in charcoal. You stand in the middle of the room, arms out, damp tunic sticking to your back, and stare at the place where your hood should be. It isn't there. It is never there when you need it, but always mysteriously present when you trip over it in the dark. Someone has stolen it, or borrowed it, or the goat has it again. The shouting returns, louder, closer. Executioner. Oi, you awake in there, or are you sleeping off another cup of bad decisions? You open the door. It creaks ominously, as doors should. Outside, the mayor's assistant stands with his hands on his hips and a face like he's just smelled something educational. He is wearing the same coat he's worn for the last 4 winters and the last 5 festivals, which is to say, something that looks like it was sewn from old curtains and poorly restrained ambition. You're late, he says, before you can say anything. The prisoner's ready. The crowd's gathering. The priest's already muttered something vaguely threatening, and the town square smells like boiled turnips and anticipation. "They'd is a pavement. I can't find my hood," you mutter, which sounds like a weak excuse even as it leaves your mouth. The assistant rolls his eyes so hard you can hear it. "Not my problem. Use a sack if you must, or tie a dishcloth around your face like last time. Just don't show up bareheaded again." The children cried for a week. You look down at yourself. You are wearing yesterday's trousers, one of which has a rip that reveals more shin than modesty allows, and a tunic stained with something that might be blood or beets or both. You consider changing. Then you remember your only other tunic was stolen by the blacksmith's apprentice during a game of drunken hide-and-seek. You still haven't found it. You still haven't forgiven him. The axe is under the cat. You say the cat's name, which is just cat, because you've never been particularly creative, and it stretches lazily before sauntering away like it was leaving by choice. You lift the axe. The blade is slightly dull. The handle is splintering in a way that suggests it's either about to break or develop a personality. You sigh. It's a long, well-practiced sigh. You've perfected it over years of underappreciated beheadings and poorly organized public rituals. It doesn't help. Outside, the village is waking in its usual way, slowly, grumpily, with the reluctant energy of a child being forced to eat something green. Smoke rises from a few chimneys. A woman is yelling at a goose. A man with no pants is arguing with a cart. You pass a group of children playing a game that involves throwing pebbles at a bucket and yelling, "Off with his head," every time they miss. One of them sees you and squeaks. They scatter. One trips and falls. You consider helping him up, but he scrambles away like you're made of nightmares and axes, which, to be fair, isn't entirely inaccurate. At the edge of the square, you catch sight of your hood. It is on the head of a particularly smug goat. The goat is chewing on a piece of parchment and standing on a crate labeled turnips, possibly cursed. You approach. The goat bleats in challenge. You lunge. The goat ducks. There's a brief struggle involving mud, turnip peels, and a very loud sneeze. You retrieve the hood, damp and chewed and smelling of vengeance. You slap it on your head just as the bells begin to toll. Slow and dramatic, like they know something you don't. The crowd is already gathered in the square, buzzing with the particular glee that only arrives when someone else is about to suffer. The prisoner stands near the block, arms bound, face pale, and eyes darting like a rabbit that knows the fox by name. The priest is muttering something about salvation and fire. You wipe mud off your cheek with the back of your sleeve and take your place. No one claps, no one cheers, but they all watch. Children peek from behind carts. Old women lean on canes like they're watching a play. You grip the axe, flex your fingers, and take a breath. The cat is sitting on the gallows, cleaning itself. The goat is trying to climb the stage. The priest nods at you solemnly and whispers, "Try not to miss this time." You step forward. The crowd leans in, and in the back of your mind, beneath the anxiety and the pressure and the smell of something burning that probably shouldn't be, you think, "I really should have been a baker." You are not, strictly speaking, employed under one title. You have a job, yes, but it has branches, roots, tentacles. It begins with the axe and ends somewhere near sewage duty, with several unfortunate detours in between. People think you only do one thing: stand in the square, hood on, axe in hand, cutting heads like you're slicing bread. But the truth is, that's the glamorous part. That's the performance. The rest of your work is done in cellars, crawl spaces, and places that smell like the back end of a toad. No one ever thanks you for that. This morning, you're unclogging a drain in the gale with a bent poker and a face full of mildew. It's not your drain. It's not even your cell. But the jailer, whose name is probably Walter but might also be Steve, waved you down in the street and said, "Executioner, there's something alive down there, and it's not on the list of permitted creatures." You nodded, because it's easier to agree than to argue, and now here you are, ankle deep in water that whispers unkind secrets and has possibly achieved sentience. Something brushes your leg. You don't scream, but you do invent a new curse word. When you're not elbow deep in prison soup, you're summoned to remove rats from the bakery, not because you're good at it, not because you trained for it, simply because someone, at some point, saw you swing an axe and assumed that gave you jurisdiction over all unwanted living things: rats, ferrets, a goose that had developed a gambling problem. You once had to escort a swan out of the mayor's study after it broke in and sat on the ledger. You tried to shoo it gently. It bit your shin and screamed like a haunted trumpet. You screamed back. It won. You both now pretend it never happened. The magistrate refers to you as our necessary shadow, which sounds flattering until you realize it means you're the part of society no one wants to look at, but still expects to be there. He says it when introducing you to visiting nobles. usually while gesturing vaguely in your direction like you're an odd statue someone put in the garden and forgot about. "Ah, yes," he'll say, swirling his wine. "That's our necessary shadow. Keeps the order, keeps the fear, cleans the drains, you know." Then he laughs, and you try not to imagine what he'd look like with turnips in his ears. Sometimes they ask you to extract confessions, which is a polite way of saying, make someone scream until they say something convenient. You hate that part. You're not good at it, not because you lack strength, but because your heart isn't in it. You once tried gently questioning a thief with tea and patience. He ended up confessing to 7 unrelated crimes, weeping into your cloak, and offering to name his first child after you. He did. It was a girl. She's doing well, apparently. On Tuesdays, you're the locksmith. Not because you know how locks work, but because you own tools and have thick fingers. When someone loses the keys to the pantry or the stocks, they call you. You show up, mutter something about divine mysteries, jam a metal rod into the mechanism, and rattle it until it either opens or gives up. Last week, you accidentally opened a cupboard that had been sealed for 20 years. Inside was a wheel of cheese, a sock, and a note that simply read, "No." You closed it again and walked away. You are invited to no dinners, but many disasters. When a man got his foot stuck in the church railing during a particularly passionate sermon, they fetched you to cut him out. You used a chisel, 3 prayers, and 1 firm slap to the ankle. When a child climbed a tree and refused to come down, screaming about justice and raisins, you were asked to talk him out of it. He recognized your hood, screamed louder, and declared himself king of branches. You bowed, left an apple at the base of the tree, and went home. He came down 3 hours later, declared peace. You are also, for reasons no one can explain, the official announcer of bad news. Deaths, missing pigs, canceled festivals. You don't have a town crier's bell or a cheerful shout. You have a slow walk, a deep voice, and the ability to make even the weather sound like an omen. When you delivered the news that Maypole Day was postponed due to chicken pox, 3 people fainted and someone tried to burn the dance ribbons. You weren't even halfway through the announcement. Your pay arrives monthly, theoretically. In practice, it arrives whenever the treasurer remembers you exist. Last month you were paid in buttons, stale bread, and a chicken that turned out to be someone's pet. The chicken now lives with you. It sleeps on your footstool and judges your life choices. It also refuses to lay eggs unless sung to. You do not sing well. The chicken does not care. No one greets you by name. You're that one, or him, or the sharp one. People cross themselves when you pass. Dogs bark. Infants cry. One particularly bold toddler once walked up to you, poked your shin, and whispered, "You smell like problems." He wasn't wrong. Despite it all, no one wants your job. There is no line of applicants, no eager apprentices. When you tried to train a boy once, he vomited at the sight of a blister and fainted during sharpening practice. He now sells onions. He's very happy. You are not a hero. You are not a villain. You are a walking inconvenience wrapped in rough cloth and misunderstood expectations. You walk through the square and someone mutters, "Ugh." You tip your hood in reply. It is the closest you ever get to applause. You decide, against all instinct and recent events involving a cursed wheelbarrow, to go to the market. It's been 3 days since your last public appearance, and the bread you've been gnawing on has begun to taste like wood and betrayal. The cat refuses to share its mice. The chicken has eaten all the turnip peels and pecked a rude word into your table. So you lace up your boots, strap on your axe because everyone gets twitchy if you leave it behind, and place your hat, black, pointy, and visibly sulking, on your head. You step outside. The weather is indifferent. The air smells like soup and hoof mud. The clouds hang low, like they're waiting for you to mess up. You take 2 steps down the path and lock eyes with a small boy holding a pear. He stares. You nod politely. He drops the pear and runs away, screaming. You sigh and keep walking, hoping for a stretch of morning in which no one hurls produce or unsolicited moral judgment. Your boots squelch in mud that seems to reach up when it sees you coming. The baker's wife crosses herself twice as you pass, once for you and once for her pie. A dog whimpers from under a cart. A very elderly man yells, "It's the Nightbringer," which is not a title you've ever officially held, but it's hard to argue when your silhouette makes children cry and soup curdle. You duck your head in what you hope is a humble and in no way threatening manner. It doesn't work. Nothing does. A young couple scurries past, whispering behind their hands. You catch the words, "That's him," and "unholy chin." You touch your chin, which is perfectly normal, and wonder if this is about that time you sneezed mid-beheading and the head did a strange bounce. You didn't mean for it to land in the cabbage stall. It was windy. People forget how windy it was. As you near the market, a leek flies past your shoulder with the speed and conviction of a monk's prayer. It misses, but not by much. You glance around. A group of teenage girls are gathered near the herbalist's stall, pretending they didn't just try to assassinate you with a vegetable. One of them makes eye contact and immediately faints. Another yells, "We don't want your cursed energy here," which is rude, especially since you once unclogged her aunt's butter churn. You keep walking. The butcher looks up and drops a sausage. The sausage hits the ground with a moist plop that echoes more than it should. He mouths, "Not today," and closes the shutters. You weren't even going to stop at his stall. His sausages taste like salt and regret. But now, out of spite, you kinda want one. You pass a reflective puddle, dark and rippling with the secrets of the gutter, and catch a glimpse of yourself. Hood slightly askew, axe glinting like a bad omen, face somewhere between haunted and allergic. You flinch. You look like the ending of a very sad ballad. You adjust the hat. It refuses to sit comfortably, sliding down your brow like it's ashamed of its role in your life. You tip it back, squint into the grayness of morning commerce, and decide to pretend you don't exist. You attempt to browse the radishes. The stallkeeper says nothing, just slides the basket a little further away from you with the end of a broom handle. You pick one up, inspect it, and she clears her throat with the energy of a warning shot. You place the radish down gently and whisper, "Fair enough." At the flower stand, something catches your eye. A single, vivid bloom. Not useful, not edible, just red. A pointless red. It stares up at you, bright and trembling. You reach out, fingers brushing its stem. The florist gasps. A few heads turn. Someone mutters, "He's hexing the daisies." You retract your hand. The flower nods at you in the breeze. Or maybe that's just your imagination. Either way, you don't buy it. You pass a fishmonger's stall. The fish are watching you. Their eyes say, "We know." You don't know what they know, but it's enough to make you walk faster. A little girl clutches her mother's skirts and whispers, "Is that death?" The mother shakes her head, then says, "Worse. It's bureaucracy. You can't even be offended. It's accurate." At the town square, the magistrate spots you and waves with two fingers like he's trying not to be associated with the gesture. "Ah, our necessary shadow," he says in a voice meant to carry. "Out for your daily loiter?" You consider responding. You consider not. You nod. He smiles like he's won something. He hasn't. You manage to purchase some cheese from a blind man who thinks you're a cousin. You don't correct him. The cheese smells like ambition. You count that as a win. On the way back, a boy on a rooftop shouts, "You'll never catch me," before realizing you aren't chasing him. You look up. He flinches and drops a sock. The sock lands on your shoulder. It is wet. You leave it there. It feels like a metaphor. You reach home without further produce-based assaults. The cat greets you by falling off a windowsill. The chicken is standing in your bed, having laid no eggs but somehow unraveling your blanket. You sit down, cheese in lap, and take off the hat. It sags in your hands like it's given up too. You place it on the hook by the door. It falls off. You don't pick it up. You find your hood halfway through a perfectly mediocre morning, right when you've resigned yourself to never seeing it again. It has, as always, disappeared on a day when it is both required and emotionally necessary. You were prepared to wear your backup scarf, the one that smells like old onions and public guilt. But then you see it. Black, threadbare, slightly crusted, dangling from the smug, chewing jaws of a goat. The goat is standing in the middle of your neighbor's garden, nibbling delicately on your professional dignity while trampling what may have once been a cabbage. You freeze. It stares at you, expression flat and vaguely superior, as if to say, "I'm eating your identity and fertilizing the herbs. What are you going to do about it?" You lunge. The goat bolts. It turns sharply, hoofs churning up dirt, and blasts through a hedge like a hairy missile. You follow, crashing through the bush, leaves stuck to your sleeves, axe banging against your side. Your boots slap mud in every direction. Somewhere, a baby starts crying. Somewhere else, an old man laughs and yells, "He's lost to the beast." You do not dignify that with a response. You are too busy barreling through 3 backyards and an unfortunate pile of drying laundry. A pair of bloomers slaps you in the face. You spit out lace and charge on. The goat sprints like it's training for the militia. You, however, are shaped like someone who eats cheese at inappropriate hours and swings large axes for a living. You are not built for speed. You are built for weight and melancholy. Still, you pursue it through an alley, around a cart of suspiciously aggressive turnips, and over a fence that you clear with a grunt and exactly zero grace. You lose sight of it briefly behind the butcher's shed. Then a scream echoes across the square and you spot it again, hood still dangling from its teeth, as it leaps over a row of barrels and straight into the bishop's courtyard. You hesitate. The bishop's courtyard is considered holy ground, or at least heavily cursed ground with good branding. You enter anyway, because at this point, your pride is less injured than your knees. The bishop's privy is a small wooden hut that leans slightly to one side and exudes the unmistakable aura of moral suffering. The goat vanishes inside. You follow, panting, one hand on your hip, the other raised in cautious anticipation. You peer around the door and immediately wish you hadn't. The hood is there. It is no longer being chewed, but it is also no longer dry, nor clean, nor inhabitable by anyone with a sense of self-worth. It has been dragged through something unspeakable, possibly theological. The goat is standing on top of the bishop's closed writing desk, triumphant, chewing a parchment that was probably important. It looks at you. It does not apologize. You retrieve your hood, lifting it gingerly between 2 fingers like a cursed relic. It drips. You don't know what. You don't want to know. You exit the privy with the slow, defeated air of a man who has wrestled meaning from the universe and come up with mildew. The bishop appears just in time to see the goat knock over a stack of ceremonial candles and urinate on his best cushion. He stares at you, at the goat, at your hood. Then he turns and walks away without a word. You respect that. Back home, you boil water and scrub the hood like it owes you money. The stains don't come out. The smell intensifies. You add herbs. You add soap. You add vinegar, salt, and something that might have been holy water but could also be expired wine. Nothing helps. You eventually give up and hang it out to dry, hoping the wind will carry away your shame. It does not. When the hood is dry, it is stiff and wrong and still faintly steaming. You put it on anyway because the magistrate is expecting you at a sentencing and has already threatened to procure another executioner, perhaps one with manners. The hood itches instantly. Not a small, ignorable itch. A crawling, brain-stabbing, neck-consuming itch that makes you question your skin's allegiance. You try adjusting it. You try ignoring it. You try thinking calming thoughts. All fail. You scratch your neck, which only moves the itch to your ear. You scratch your ear, and it relocates to the crown of your head. It is everywhere. It is alive. Walking through town, you feel like a man on fire pretending to be composed. You nod at villagers, most of whom scurry away like you're contagious. Someone mutters, "Hexed." Someone else whispers, "Plague hood." A third person tries to sell you a scented candle called Blessed Fog. You arrive at the square mid-itch, face twitching, shoulders jerking slightly. The prisoner looks more afraid of you than the axe. The magistrate asks if you're drunk. You are not. You are simply battling an ancient, fabric-based evil that clings to your scalp like a tick of destiny. During the sentencing, a breeze lifts the hem of the hood and wafts its internal bouquet across the crowd. A few people gag. A woman swoons. The priest starts coughing and doesn't stop until someone slaps him on the back and calls for garlic. You pretend not to notice. After the execution, which you perform with more neck twitching than usual, you rip the hood off your head the moment you're out of sight and fling it against the wall. It lands with a squelch and a small puff of dust. The cat sniffs it, sneezes violently, and leaves the room. You sit on your stool, rubbing your temples, aware that tomorrow will come, and with it, another public appearance. You consider crafting a new hood, something soft, breathable, less vengeful. But hoods don't grow on trees, and you're fairly certain the tailor has been avoiding you since the incident with the cursed pants. So you pick up the old hood. You hold it in your lap like a sleeping goblin. It itches your thigh through your trousers. You sigh. And for the third time this week, you say to no one in particular, "I should have been a beekeeper." The axe is not magical. You've checked. You've hoped. You've stared at it long enough to sprain an optic nerve, willing it to glow or hum, or at least politely self-sharpen. But no. It just sits there on the table like a particularly judgmental loaf of metal. It is heavy, dull, and quietly resents you, which, to be fair, makes two of you. This morning begins, as many do, with disappointment. You reach for your trusty whetstone and discover that it is not in its usual place, tucked neatly under the pile of gloves you never wear. It is also not under the pile of gloves you do wear, nor behind the cheese wheel you've been saving for a day that never comes. You search the entire cottage, including the increasingly suspicious space beneath the chicken's roost, where you find an old sock, a drawing of a duck, and something that might be a curse, but turns out to just be last week's lunch. Still no whetstone. You call for your assistant, which is generous, considering he was hired mostly because he stood nearby when you dropped a bucket and muttered something about needing help or divine intervention. He stumbles in from the yard, holding a piece of cheese in one hand and your axe in the other. The axe has cheese on it. There are crumbs along the edge. Gouda, possibly criminally acquired. You ask him why he's using a state instrument of execution as a dairy slicer. He shrugs, says the knife was dirty. Says this with the confidence of someone who does not understand metaphors or laws. You take the axe from him gently, like you're retrieving a baby from a fire, and examine the blade. It has been used recently and enthusiastically on something soft, fatty, and deeply disrespectful to iron. You whisper something to it. The axe, not the assistant. The axe does not respond. There's a sentencing scheduled in less than 2 hours. The magistrate has already informed you that today's event must be dignified, efficient, and ideally bloodless, which is rich, coming from a man whose wig once caught fire during a rainstorm. You would like to oblige. You would like, at minimum, to not become the central figure in another comedic ballad performed by children at market. But your axe is blunt, your whetstone is missing, and your assistant is now trying to feed cheese to the cat, who looks profoundly insulted and slightly homicidal. You attempt to sharpen the blade with the edge of a brick. This goes poorly. It makes a sound like regret and leaves red dust all over your shirt. You wipe the blade on your sleeve, which achieves nothing except transferring the shame more directly onto your person. You try a broken piece of pottery, a fire poker. At one point, the assistant offers his teeth, which you ignore on principle. The blade remains dull. You consider announcing that the execution is postponed due to spiritual weather. You consider faking a fainting spell. You consider simply running into the woods and becoming folklore. But you don't, because you are, for reasons unclear even to you, someone who shows up, someone who tries, someone who, despite being cursed by bad luck and worse management, still believes that maybe, just maybe, things will go moderately fine. The town square is already full when you arrive, hood itching, axe wrapped in a cloth like it's embarrassed. People part around you like you smell bad, which you probably do. The prisoner is standing quietly by the block, looking more annoyed than afraid. You nod at him. He nods back. You've met before. He once sold you a pie. It was undercooked. You unwrap the axe and place it on the block. It makes a sad, flat thunk. The crowd stirs. The magistrate clears his throat and gives a speech about justice and order, and how grateful everyone should be that the system works, even when it absolutely doesn't. You tune him out and stare at your reflection in the blade, which is dull enough to be a mirror and just warped enough to make your nose look heroic. That's something. The moment comes. You raise the axe. You lower the axe. The axe makes contact with the neck, or rather, brushes it politely. The prisoner blinks. You blink. The axe rests there like it needs a nap. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Someone gasps. Someone else says, "Is he massaging him?" You lift the axe again, pretending that was just a practice swing, a rehearsal, a dramatic flourish. The prisoner raises an eyebrow. The second swing lands with a louder thump, but still not the decisive kind. The prisoner winces and says, "Do you need help?" You say no, absolutely not. You are a professional. You lift the axe again. By the fourth swing, the prisoner has started humming. The crowd is beginning to leave. A man in the back is handing out boiled eggs and making commentary like it's theater. The magistrate is hiding behind his podium, mumbling something about paperwork. Finally, on the sixth try, after adjusting your grip, whispering an apology to the blade, and offering the gods a promise to eat fewer sweets, you manage a proper cut. It's not elegant, but it's effective. There is polite clapping. One woman cheers weakly. The prisoner, head now detached, looks as peaceful as a man can when his final moments involved light, percussion, and public confusion. You wrap the axe again, the cloth now damp and smelling faintly of failure. The magistrate approaches, patting your shoulder like you're a draft horse that just barely made it over a fence. He tells you the job is safe. You nod, wondering if that's a threat. Back at home, you find the whetstone. It's behind the assistant's bed, next to a half-eaten turnip and a sketch of a goose with the word "soon" written underneath. You say nothing. You simply retrieve it, sit by the hearth, and begin sharpening the axe, slowly, carefully, with all the calm of a man who has survived another day of public humiliation and still has to be up by dawn to chase a goat. Execution day begins the way it always does, with indigestion and a faint sense of impending doom. You wake up too early, stomach churning from last night's decision to eat pickled eggs with reckless emotional abandon. You lace your boots while squinting at a sun that has no business being that smug. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster screams like it's auditioning for a tragic opera. You throw on your best wool tunic, heavy, dark, slightly moth-nibbled, and immediately begin sweating through it. You haven't even left the house yet. The day hasn't even begun, and already your armpits have declared war. The square is loud before you even see it. A humming, jeering, meat pie-scented mass of humanity, all craning for a glimpse of the block like it's the main act at a traveling show instead of, state-sanctioned death. You push your way through the outskirts, hood in place, axe on shoulder, trying to exude professionalism and not trip over your own feet. Someone recognizes you and hisses. Someone else tosses a coin that misses you and hits a child. The child cheers. As you take your place beside the platform, you glance at the condemned, who is currently pacing in a very dramatic fashion, clearly hoping to be remembered for theatrical flair. He's young, scrappy, and has the overconfident look of someone who still believes he might talk his way out of this. He catches your eye and smirks. You nod politely, because it's important to maintain standards even when preparing to decapitate someone. The crowd, already thick with sweat and judgment, begins to shout suggestions. Do a flip. Someone hollers, presumably at you. Sing a song, cries another. A vendor yells, hot lamb on a stick, loud enough that for a moment you forget why you're here and genuinely consider buying one. You focus. This is not for you. This is for the law. You are not here to entertain. You are here to remove a head from a body in the least traumatizing way possible, though that bar is criminally low. The magistrate appears, robed and important, sweating more than you and trying not to show it. He clears his throat and begins reading from a scroll, which is mostly a long list of whereases and therefores that boil down to, this man did crimes, and now he will do death. The crowd loses interest about 3 sentences in. A few people start clapping along with the rhythm. One person does an impression of the magistrate's voice that's disturbingly accurate. You glance at your axe. It is freshly sharpened, miraculously clean, and somehow still smells like cheese. You tell yourself that doesn't matter. It's symbolic, or maybe cursed. Either way, it's the only thing that makes you look remotely like an authority figure instead of a sweaty man in a costume who's very much rethinking his career choices. The condemned man is positioned. He's shaking now, the bravado gone. He makes eye contact again, and this time there's no smirk, just a flicker of something human. Fear, regret, or possibly confusion about how one ends up here, in front of strangers, under a sky that suddenly looks a bit too blue for death. You raise your axe. The crowd goes silent, and then someone yells, bet you miss. You try not to sigh, but your body sighs for you. You've done this before. Too many times. You know the rhythm. You know how the head will fall, how the body will twitch, how someone in the front row will immediately gag and pretend they're fine. What you don't know, what you never know, is how to feel afterward. There's no rule book for emotional residue. No guide for what it means to be the final thing someone sees. You're not evil. You're just on the payroll. Still, you remember your first execution, the awkward way you held the axe, the accidental handshake with the prisoner, the immediate vomiting afterward behind the cabbage cart. You were younger then, more hopeful, less itchy. Now, you just do your job. You swing. The axe connects. The head falls. Thankfully, in the correct direction. A clean cut. Efficient. One and done. The body slumps forward like it's relieved. The crowd erupts, half in cheers, half in gasps. Someone faints. A child asks if they can touch the block. You absolutely say no. The magistrate claps you on the back and declares justice served. You nod. You wipe the blade on a cloth that's seen too much. You wrap it. You leave the stage. Behind the platform, out of view, you sit down on a crate and take off your hood. The air is cool against your scalp. Your assistant hands you a flask of something that's either water or punishment. You drink it anyway. You hear the crowd begin to disperse. Vendors resume shouting. A group of teenagers reenacts the beheading using a loaf of bread and an onion. You wonder if they'll still laugh about it when it's their friend, their neighbor, their brother. You hope they never have to find out. The condemned's body will be carted off. His name forgotten by most, but etched somewhere in your spine. You'll dream about him tonight, probably. You dream about all of them eventually, not vividly. just enough to wake up tired. You stand, stretch your legs, and prepare for the walk home. The square is already being swept, reset, made tidy. Tomorrow, there'll be music here. A puppet show, a wedding maybe, the same boards, different script. The sun is higher now. The day is too bright for morning. You step into the light anyway. The prisoner is already talking before you even sit down. It's not a good sign. The ones who talk early are either hopelessly guilty or deeply annoying, and frequently both. This one's got the wiry look of a man who has recently shouted, "You'll regret this," in a crowded tavern. His hair is sticking up in patches like it's trying to leave his head, and his breath smells like he's been eating raw garlic to build up spiritual immunity. He grins when he sees you, which feels inappropriate. You sit anyway. It's part of the job. Nobody trains you for this part. You're technically just supposed to ensure he's sober enough to stand, sane enough to understand, and not actively trying to bite through his own tongue. But it always turns into a conversation because no one wants to go out in silence. Even the worst ones want their moment of humanity right before you ruin it. He starts by asking your name. You don't give it. He calls you Blade Guy instead, which is somehow both wrong and uncomfortably accurate. Then he offers you a bribe, leaning in like your old friends conspiring over dice. He promises silver, a horse, a kiss from a girl he swears isn't related to him. You say no, because you always say no, but this time you do think about it. Not because of the horse or the silver, but because the idea of just not doing it has an unfamiliar flavor this morning, like forgetting to lock your door and wondering if you might be free now. He takes your hesitation as a maybe, which is dangerous. He leans closer, eyes gleaming with garlic and hope, and whispers something about a prophecy. You blink. He nods, solemn. Apparently, he's been told since birth that a hooded man with tired eyes would arrive on the last day and set him free. He peers at your hood. He peers at your eyes. He tells you, in hushed tones, that you have the energy of destiny. You were hoping to have the energy of a nap. He talks fast, like he's afraid the prophecy might evaporate if he pauses. He says the stars aligned today, that the birds flew west this morning, that he saw a squirrel holding a key, that you, yes, you, are the chosen one. You try to look wise because it seems like the polite thing to do. You nod slowly. You furrow your brow. You accidentally yawn. He doesn't notice. Instead, he launches into a story about his childhood, something involving a dream and a goat and a woman named Thistle, who once said he would die important. He says all of this with the tone of someone who thinks he's making an airtight case. You wonder if he rehearsed it. You've heard dozens of final monologues by now. Some are weepy, some are angry, some are poetry, which is worse. You once had a man recite a 7-verse ballad about ducks. This one's different only in that it seems to believe its own nonsense. He believes he's meant for something. He believes you're the key to it. It's a lot of pressure for someone who can't even get a decent whetstone delivered on time. He keeps talking. You check his manacles, mostly for something to do with your hands. They're secure. His pulse is fast. You consider asking if he wants water, but decide against it. You've seen what passes for water in this dungeon and wouldn't offer it to an enemy, let alone someone about to meet his judgment. He shifts tactics, asks you about your day, asks what you eat for breakfast, tells you garlic is good for the soul and for seduction, winks. You stare. He says you should smile more. You don't. You haven't smiled since the bishop made you decapitate a statue because it offended someone's niece. Even then, it was more of a grimace. You try redirecting the conversation to matters of legality. Remind him what he's accused of, what he's confessed to, what 10 eyewitnesses and one very angry goat have sworn under oath. He nods along. He doesn't argue. He just says, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It never island." He asks if it will hurt. You tell him no, if he stays still. He asks if you'll look after his dog. You say you're allergic. He asks if you'll tell his brother he forgives him. You make a non-committal noise. He asks if he'll get to haunt someone. You say only if the paperwork clears. He laughs at that. So do you, but softly, because this room smells like endings. When the guard knocks, it's time. You stand. He doesn't move. You wait. He asks one last question. What would you do if it were you? You don't answer right away. Not because you don't know, but because what you do doesn't matter. You'd beg. You'd lie. You'd cry. You'd promise the moon and deliver dirt. You'd claw at fate with your bare hands until your nails cracked. And still, you'd end up here, on a stool, in a room, trying to convince someone else to break the rules of a machine built entirely from rules. So you just say, "I'd talk." He nods. Then, he walks. As you follow him out into the light, you catch your reflection in a puddle. Hooded, hunched, and undeniably tired. You don't look like a chosen one. You look like someone who carries endings in his pockets and forgets to empty them before washing. But maybe, just maybe, there's some small magic in listening. Maybe prophecies come true in pieces. You step onto the platform. The sky is cloudless. The garlic lingers. You kneel beside the block, pulling out the whetstone like it's a sacred relic instead of a piece of chipped rock that smells faintly of cheese and regret. The sun is already high, blistering the back of your neck and making your wool tunic adhere to your spine like an overly affectionate bat. The axe rests across your knees, heavy and familiar, blade duller than you'd like, but not so dull that anyone could accuse you of laziness. You begin the ceremony of sharpening, which isn't actually ceremonial, but everyone treats it like it is, so you play along. The crowd leans in. There's a hush that settles over them, the sort that can only be broken by the crunch of an apple or the high-pitched wheeze of an excited child. Today, it's both. Someone bites into fruit. A child squeals. He's doing the murder dance. A ripple of laughter passes through the audience. You pause just long enough to sigh internally and resume sliding the blade along the stone, slow and steady, the sound rough and rhythmic and slightly too sensual for comfort. The magistrate is already sweating through 3 layers of decorative fur and trying to look disapproving, though you know he enjoys the spectacle as much as the rest. He once requested you hum ominously during the sharpening process. You declined. He hummed anyway. You steal a glance at the prisoner. He's watching you with a sort of bemused curiosity, like you're a squirrel attempting carpentry. He's tied to the post, but comfortably so. Your assistant is overly fond of symmetrical knots. The man's expression is calm, which is annoying. There's something particularly frustrating about a condemned person who looks more relaxed than you do. He raises his eyebrows at you. You return to the whetstone. A bee lands on your face, not near your face, not circling politely in the air like a distant threat. Directly on your eyelid, you freeze. The axe halts mid-stroke. The crowd doesn't notice at first, but the prisoner does. He tilts his head, watching intently. You try to blink it away without blinking. Your hands stay on the axe. Your jaw locks. Your nostrils flare with all the dignity you can muster, which is approximately none. The bee meanders. It wanders up toward your brow ridge, possibly seeking real estate. The prisoner laughs. It's not cruel laughter. It's delighted, genuine, like someone who has just realized the universe still contains small mercies. He says something about karma. You ignore him, delicately lowering the whetstone and raising one hand to gently brush the bee away. It departs without violence. You exhale with the quiet fury of a man denied his authority by an insect. You resume sharpening. The rhythm is off now, but no one seems to care. A few people have begun whispering to each other, possibly placing bets. Your assistant is trying to look helpful by arranging the execution tools like they're part of a picnic. You make a mental note to hide the rope from him later. He's been tying nooses in his sleep. The axe edge is almost there, almost clean, almost sharp, almost ready to cleave bone with the efficiency your station demands. You angle it toward the Sunday. The blade catches the light with a glimmer that would be dramatic if it didn't also illuminate the bit of old sausage stuck near the hilt. You rub it off with the hem of your tunic. The prisoner snorts. You glance at him again. He's still smiling. You wonder what he sees. A man in a hood, sweating, kneeling on cracked planks, performing the same ritual he's seen a dozen times before. Or maybe he sees something worse. A man who believes this performance matters, that the sharpening has meaning, that the axe will be any kinder for being polished in front of an audience. You stand slowly, lifting the axe. You hold it up, not to intimidate, not even to test its weight, but because that's what they expect. The crowd leans forward. The magistrate puffs out his chest. Someone starts humming something vaguely ominous and gets shushed. You say nothing. You never do. You've learned that silence carries more authority than speeches. Besides, your speeches are bad. Once, you accidentally quoted a love poem before an execution. It was awkward for everyone. The prisoner clears his throat. He asks if you've ever considered another line of work. You say nothing. He says he once wanted to be a baker. You nod, like you understand, like there's still a version of the world where wanting something is enough to get it. You lower the axe to your side. The whetstone sits quietly at your feet. The child who called it a murder dance is now eating a pie. She gives you a thumbs up. You try to look neutral, and not like a man currently being rated by children for professional head removal. The ceremony is over. The blade is ready. You are not. But that doesn't matter. The first swing lands, but it isn't the kind of swing they'll write songs about. It's not even the kind of swing you'd want mentioned in passing at a tavern. It connects, yes, but at the wrong angle, and just a hair off center, which would be fine if heads were made of soft cheese and not skulls, cartilage, and the bitter residue of last-minute prayers. There's a sound, dull, thick, too wet. And then there's a silence so deep, it feels like even the birds have stopped mid-flight to cringe. You freeze, just for a second, not long. Long enough for your assistant to inhale dramatically, long enough for the priest to cross himself with a bit more gusto than usual, like he's trying to cover for both of you. Long enough for a woman in the front row to clutch her chest and slide to the cobblestones in a swoon that is either very sincere or very performative, and honestly, either is valid right now. The prisoner makes a noise, or maybe it's just air. It doesn't matter. He's definitely still dying. That much is clear. Just not in the elegant, swift fashion you had planned. You hate this part. Not the blood or the cleanup or the stares. It's the messiness, the sloppiness. You pride yourself on precision, on doing something horrifying with at least a little dignity, and now everyone's looking at you like you just tripped over a candelabra and landed face first in sin. You adjust your grip, breathe once, just once, then swing again. This time it's clean, not quiet, not merciful, but clean. The head rolls, lands in the sawdust with a thump like an overripe melon, and comes to rest against the block. The body shudders, then stills. The priest whispers something quick in Latin. Your assistant lets out a long breath that says, "We will never speak of this." The crowd begins to react, slowly at first, as if unsure whether clapping is appropriate under these circumstances. Someone throws a cabbage. It's soft, past its prime, and sails through the air in slow motion, end over end, until it smacks the platform and explodes in a sad little puff of leaf. The thrower doesn't yell anything. They just nod, solemnly, like they needed to do it for closure. You nod back. It feels fair. The magistrate is studiously looking at the clouds, pretending not to have witnessed any hiccups in procedure. He's already mentally editing the town record. Swift justice was served, it will say, with no footnotes about second swings or airborne vegetables. You appreciate his commitment to narrative. He appreciates plausible deniability. You reach for the cloth and begin wiping down the axe, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Your hands are steady. That's something. You make the movements automatic. Blade, hilt, blade again, trying not to think about the noise it made when it hit the first time. It was a bad cut, but it wasn't the worst. You've seen worse. Done worse, though never on purpose. You once had to use a backup axe that bent like a spoon in summer heat. The prisoner that day had opinions, which he shouted until the third swing. You'd rather not revisit that memory. This one is already enough to last you through several bad dreams and at least one stress-induced nosebleed. The crowd begins to disperse, slowly, not with the usual rowdy energy, but with something closer to disappointed murmuring, like a puppet show ended early because the puppets caught fire. A child asks if you meant to do that. Her mother shushes her. You don't answer. You never do. You glance down at what's left of the prisoner. He looks smaller now. They always do. The body's still twitching a bit, nerves being stubborn. The head has a look on its face that might be surprise or judgment or just gravity pulling everything downward. You reach for the sack, slide it over the head, and lift it with both hands, careful not to jostle. The ceremonial basket is waiting, already lined with straw that smells faintly of mint and old sweat. You place the head inside, gently, like it might wake up if you're too rough. Your assistant is already gathering the tools. He hums as he works, which is a choice. You consider asking him to stop, but decide that speaking would make this moment more real. Instead, you focus on wiping the block, on making the blood look like it was always part of the wood grain. The stains never fully come out, but it helps to try. The priest offers a final benediction. The magistrate coughs into his sleeve and steps down from the platform as if it's beneath him to linger near mistakes. You know he'll talk about you later. Say things like fatigued and losing his edge. You've heard it before. You'll hear it again. It's part of the job. You're not judged for swinging the axe. You're judged for how beautifully you fail. You remove your hood and wipe your face with the inside of it. A mistake. It now smells like iron and onions. You take a step down from the platform and your ankle pops. Someone whispers, "He's getting old." You want to whisper back, "He's tired." But you just keep walking. Later, in the storeroom, you sit on a barrel and stare at the axe. It leans against the wall like it's sulking. You think about the first time you used it, how carefully you lined everything up, how badly it still went. There's a kind of memory in the blade now. You wonder if it remembers today, too. Eventually, you'll go home. You'll eat something bland. You'll stare at the fire too long. Maybe you'll try to sleep. You won't succeed, but you'll try. The prisoner is very dead. Eventually, everyone leaves like they always do. Slowly, then all at once, like their shoes are tied to obligation, but their hearts are halfway to stew and ale. The crowd trickles away down the cobbled streets, carrying the heat of judgment and the faint tang of sausage. The magistrate disappears under his silly little umbrella. The priest nods solemnly and makes a cross in the air that you're pretty sure lands nowhere in particular. Your assistant waves, then forgets he's still holding the broom and bops himself on the head. It's not the first time. It won't be the last. And then there's just you. You in the platform. You in the silence that follows spectacle. You in the blood. It's not the dramatic kind of blood. No elegant spray or cinematic puddle. It's sticky, reluctant, thick with second thoughts. It has seeped into the wood, clung to the grooves, made itself at home like a tenant with no rent and too many political opinions. You sigh. You know this part. You kneel, already sore, already resigned, and start the process. The rags smell like vinegar, rot, and whatever sorrow smells like when it's been bottled and forgotten on a shelf. You wring one out and begin to scrub. The block resists, as always. It doesn't like being cleaned. It prefers history, even the messy kind. A raven lands on the railing with the grace of a creature that knows it's more important than you. It tilts its head. You glance up at it mid-scrub and grunt a hello. The raven says nothing, but its beady eyes say plenty. Judgment, approval, possibly hunger. You tell it not today. It doesn't respond, but it does stay. Another one joins, then a third. You now have a small tribunal of winged onlookers. You mutter something about at least someone watching your work, even if they're only here for leftovers. The mop water turns pink, then reddish-brown, then something that looks like the color of secrets. You keep working. The sky stays politely overcast, the sun having had enough of today's drama. The wind doesn't move. Time pauses just enough to make you feel like maybe you're in a painting. A very unfortunate one. You think about what you'd be doing if you had said no to this job. There was a time, brief, mostly theoretical, when you considered being a cooper. Barrels, simple, contained, wooden things with a purpose. They hold wine. They don't scream. You shake the thought away before it curdles into longing. You are not a cooper. You are a cleaner of execution platforms and a listener to ungrateful birds. A clump of something unidentifiable resists the rag. You prod it. It squelches. You choose not to investigate further and instead use the heavy end of the mop to negotiate a truce. The ravens caw softly in what may be appreciation or insult. You can't tell anymore. Your assistant has left the tools piled haphazardly near the stairs. You consider organizing them. You do not. You're not paid for tool maintenance. You're not even sure you're properly paid at all. You suspect some of your wages have been diverted to miscellaneous town expenses, which you are fairly certain includes the mayor's collection of miniature war horses. Speaking of the mayor, he passes by just then, waddling in a manner he likely believes to be stately. He doesn't stop. He doesn't look directly at you, but as he goes by, he mutters, "Graceful form today." And then he's gone. You stare at the spot where he stood. You wonder if that was a compliment, an insult, or simply a man talking to avoid the sound of his own thoughts. You whisper, "Graceful form," under your breath, and nearly laugh. Nearly, but the moment slips through your fingers like wet straw. You pour out the used water, watching it slide down the gutter like a lazy ghost. The ravens follow it with interest. One hops closer to your bucket. You tell it no. It blinks. You blink back. It flaps away, disgusted. Fair. There is a final pass with the rag, a ritual more than necessity. You trace the edge of the block with your cloth like you're tucking it in. There. Done. Clean. Or at least cleaner. Presentable. If someone squints. You sit on the edge of the platform and let your hands rest in your lap. They smell like vinegar and remorse. You stare at them for a moment longer than usual. You ask the ravens if they ever regret anything. One of them squawks. You decide that means yes. You rise. Slowly. Your knees sound like a closing book. The mop goes back into the bucket back into the shed. You close the door with a click that sounds like finality and forgetfulness all at once. The world resumes. The wind picks up. The sun returns. People begin to talk again. Elsewhere. You walk home. Tomorrow, there will be another name on the list. Another sharpening. Another audience waiting to see if you falter or fly. But for now, there is vinegar on your boots and silence in your chest. You do not speak it aloud, but you think the words anyway, quiet and sharp as the blade should have been. Graceful form, torture paperwork is somehow both the worst part of your job and the part that gives you back pain without the dignity of moral crisis. You don't even get to do the torture. You're not sure that's a bad thing. You've read the guidelines. You've watched the torturer, whose name might be Greg, or possibly something that starts with Blunt. You've witnessed the whole theatrical mess of gears and belts, and the weird little fork that makes people confess to things they definitely did not do. You once saw a man confess to inventing fog. That was a Tuesday. Today is also a Tuesday. You know this because you've just spent 40 minutes trying to scrub someone's scream off a ledger page, and because the town crier called it Torture Supervision Day again. With that unfortunate enthusiasm he brings to everything, including plague notices and the annual cheese parade. You don't correct him. You've learned not to correct anyone anymore. It just leads to more work. You are not in charge of the torturing. You are in charge of documenting it, which means watching someone's toe get broken with a small wooden rod and then writing in careful, squashed script. Left second toe, middle phalange, cracked audibly. Suspect said, and I quote, "My uncle was the bishop's goat." You're not sure if that's useful intelligence, but you write it down anyway, because there's a column for that, and you're not allowed to leave it blank. You've developed a system, which makes you feel organized and hollow at the same time. You have separate ledgers for sounds, yells, shrieks, full confessions, interesting metaphors, wounds, cracked, pierced, peeled, and fluids. The last one fills up fast. You try not to think about it. You've started using abbreviations. CFAHH stands for confession followed by extended screaming. BF&M is broken femur. No meaning. SQS is said quite suddenly, which covers all the weird things people blurt out when their nerves are more memory than muscle. There is no joy in this, but there is a certain grim neatness, which is the only comfort you have on days when your sleeves are stained with ink and maybe something else, and your hood keeps slipping into your eyes because the goat chewed the ties again. You've tried replacing it, but every new one just reminds you of how old the original island, and how you, by extension, have also become an artifact in this town. Not loved, not feared, just kept. Today's prisoner is a man with excellent hair and very few secrets. He's being punished for something vague involving the miller's daughter and 5 stolen geese. No one seems particularly invested in what he did. The mayor just wanted him inconvenienced. So now he's here, shouting rhymed insults through the gag like a demented bard while Greg, or Blunt, rotates a wheel with too much flair. You nod, you scribble. Subject, extremely rhythmic. Lyrics involve geese. Note, decent meter. Your quill breaks. Of course, you reach for another and accidentally knock over the ink pot. It cascades down the side of the table and onto your trousers, which are already still slightly damp from this morning's attempt to chase a chicken out of your firewood. You stare down at the spreading stain, black and judgmental, and wonder if anyone has ever drowned in ink. You feel like you're halfway there. Greg. Blunt grunts. The prisoner groans. You sigh. You finish the current page and flip to a fresh one, only to realize it's been glued shut by what you sincerely hope is wax. The town's record-keeping supplies are limited, and by limited you mean you've been reusing paper since last year's witch panic. You peel the pages apart and transcribe the last set of noises. Subject hiccups, then weeps, then sings 3 bars of Old Hen, Stay Home. The torturer leans over and offers you something that might be a sympathy loaf or might be a piece of spleen. You decline. It is only noon. You are summoned, not by bell but by a boy too young to fear you and too fast to catch, who yells. Mayor says bring the folders, and then vanishes into a stack of hay like a very annoying magician. You gather the folders. They are heavy. They always are. Secrets weigh more when you're the one writing them down. The mayor, when you reach him, is wearing a hat shaped like a meringue and insists on reviewing each form like it's poetry. This phrasing here, he says, tapping at a sentence where you described a dislocated shoulder as like a chicken wing, unasked for, is undignified. Please say, we're positioned unwillingly. You nod. You will not change it. You will pretend you did. This is your small rebellion, and also how you stay sane. When you return to your corner of the records room, the ravens have found their way inside again. One is sitting on your ink-stained trousers like it owns the desk. You do not move it. It hisses at your quill. You hiss back. You finish the day's reports, bind them with the string that smells faintly of mildew and betrayal, and file them alphabetically under "Oops," as you always do. No one checks the labels. No one wants to. You could file them under "Jazz," and it would make just as much sense. You do this because you have to, not because anyone expects brilliance. Just blood, boxes ticked, and plausible deniability. You wash your hands. The water turns gray, and then pink, and then nothing. You sit at your desk for a moment longer than needed, quill in hand, ink on shirt, blood in memory. You do not like torture, but you are very good at paperwork. At the tavern, the door creaks open like it's trying to warn everyone. You step in anyway, because you are very tired and extremely hungry, and the pantry at home contains precisely 3 onions, half a candle, and what you suspect is a sock full of raisins that wasn't always raisins. The room doesn't go quiet when you enter. It does something worse. It slows. Voices drop half a tone. Chairs shift. A man who was mid-laugh turns it into a cough and stares very hard at his mead. You are not welcome, but you are tolerated. And in this town, that's almost affection. You shuffle over to your usual stool at the end of the bar, the one with the wobbly leg and the nail sticking out at just the right angle to maim your shin. You sit anyway, because it's either this or stand in the corner like an ominous statue. You rest your elbows on the bar. You try to look casual. You accidentally knock over a bowl of nuts. The barkeep sighs and replaces them with a stick. Not to stir them, to push them toward you from a safe distance. You order the soup. The barkeep doesn't answer, just turns and ladles it from a pot with all the enthusiasm of someone retrieving socks from a pond. He returns, nudges the bowl across the counter with the same stick, and walks away without a word. You hear him whisper something to a server that sounds like, "Don't make eye contact," which is ironic, because you are aggressively not making eye contact with anyone. The soup is a color you can't quite name, somewhere between regret and rust. You stare at it. It stares back. You taste it. It tastes like warm water that once considered being a vegetable. You do not complain, because you have learned that nothing makes people more uncomfortable than you speaking with human feelings in your voice. Someone coughs pointedly to your left. You glance. The man who was sitting 2 stools over is now 3 stools over. The couple on your right have subtly shifted their bodies to form a small barricade of elbows and shoulder blades. No one says anything, but the message is clear. You are not to be touched, not physically, not socially, and certainly not with kindness. You focus on your soup. You try to enjoy it. You try to ignore the bard. The bard is singing about justice again. He always sings about justice. He says the word like it's a spell, and he's the chosen one. His lute is out of tune, and his voice lands somewhere between earnest and nasal. He sings of light triumphing over darkness, of evil being unmasked, of courage standing alone against cruelty. He sings these things while looking directly at you. Every time he says, "darkness," his eyes find your hood. You pretend not to notice. You have perfected the art of deliberate obliviousness. You raise your spoon. You chew without chewing. You become one with the bowl. The soup sloshes like it's also embarrassed to be here. The bard keeps going. His songs are never short. He has verses about mercy and repentance, and something about a boy who tames a lion with a flute. You are not sure what this has to do with anything. Neither is the lion, probably. He ends the song with a dramatic flourish and a long pause meant for applause. He receives a single sneeze and the clink of someone oversalting their beans. You continue eating your soup, slowly, with the focus of a monk and the enthusiasm of a person chewing wet parchment. A child wanders too close and is immediately pulled back by a parent. You catch a few muttered words. Blood, filth, not near your food. And you swallow a mouthful of shame with your spoon. It goes down hard. There is no water on the table. You forgot to ask. You always forget to ask, because your hands are usually full of something worse. The man across the room, the one who sells buttons and smells like sheep, leans in to tell a joke. It ends in executioner, and everyone around him laughs. You do not hear the beginning, but you get the gist. You smile faintly, but only to yourself. If you do it out loud, they might think you're planning something. A woman near the fire tries to pretend she didn't just switch chairs to sit with her back to you. She knocks over her own cup in the process. No one helps clean it up. She dabs at the spill with a rag and says something under her breath that includes your name and the word aura. You finish your soup. It has cooled completely, but you do not mind. It's easier to eat when it doesn't pretend to be nourishing. You slide the bowl forward and leave the coin on the counter. The barkeep picks it up with the stick. You do not blame them. You used to. In your first month, you tried to make conversation. You made jokes. You brought your own utensils. Once, you even offered to buy the whole room around. The room declined, politely, but with all the warmth of a locked door. Now you understand. You are not a person here. You are a role. You are the shape of consequence. They do not hate you, not exactly. They fear the idea of you. They hate that you have a name and a favorite soup and a way of folding your hands when you're nervous. They want the hood to stay on. They want your hands to stay busy. They want you to be something they can point at and say, there, that, not me. You step outside. The air is cold and vaguely moist. Probably fog again. You pull the hood further down and walk toward the outskirts of town where no one follows and no one stares. You hope next week's soup is warmer. The bells ring in that hopeful, jangly way that only weddings and extremely enthusiastic goats manage. You hear them before you see the crowd, a soft hum of song and over-polished shoes clacking in cobblestones, the kind of shoes that get worn once, maybe twice, before becoming a permanent fixture in someone's attic. You're not supposed to be here. That part is obvious. But you have to pass through this square to get to the apothecary, and your toe is still infected from last week's unfortunate barn incident. So you keep walking, hood on, head down, shoulders hunched in that way that says, don't mind me, I'm just a living omen. People part like soup around a hair. The bride is beautiful, in the way that only someone with unbloodied hands and lace can be. She wears white, or at least the medieval approximation of white, which is somewhere between eggshell and hopeful beige. Her flowers are fresh. Her smile dies the moment she sees you. You consider nodding politely. Instead, you wave. It is a small, slightly apologetic wave, the kind that means, yes, it's me. Sorry, I just need to get through. Please don't let my presence ruin your lifetime commitment. She gasps. The groom steps in front of her like you've drawn a sword, and not just existed. You keep walking. You can feel every eye on you like a weighty, wet cloak. No one says your name, but several say him, and at least one child points and whispers something about the color of death. You don't correct him. He's not wrong. Someone hisses something about bad luck. Someone else drops a cup and blames it on your aura. You are unsure what your aura is, but if it were a food, it would probably be stale turnips. There's a tray of food near the edge of the crowd. Not guarded. Probably not meant for you. But it's late, and you missed lunch because a man accidentally hanged himself in the wrong place, and it took 2 hours to untangle the mess. And there it is. A sausage. Perfectly crisped. Unclaimed. Gleaming in the sunlight, like a meat-based apology. You take it. Not with flair. You don't flourish. You just reach, grab, pocket. You don't eat it immediately. That would be too bold, too direct. You wait until you've turned the corner, until the sound of the bells is muffled behind layers of stone and regret, and then you eat it. Slowly, thoughtfully, like a man savoring a stolen sin. It tastes divine. You chew each bite like it owes you something. It kind of does. You didn't get a seat at the feast. You didn't get a dance or a toast or even a nod, but you got this sausage, and for one blessed moment, it is enough. Then the guilt arrives. Late, but wearing spurs. You tell yourself it was a practical decision. You needed the protein. Your job is physically demanding and emotionally imploding. You tell yourself the sausage was barely missed, probably destined to be eaten by a distant cousin who thinks executioner is a type of cheese. You tell yourself a lot of things, but the truth is, you stole food from a wedding you weren't invited to, and somehow that feels worse than the part where you removed 3 heads this week. Those people had trials. The sausage didn't. You feel guilty for almost 5 minutes, which is a new record. The apothecary doesn't greet you when you enter. He gestures vaguely toward the back where the jars are kept and does not look up from his mortar and pestle. He is grinding something that smells like angry flowers. You nod, though he cannot see you. You retrieve a small packet labeled toe balm, advanced, and leave the appropriate number of coins. The bell above the door doesn't even bother to ring as you leave. It knows better. You pass the wedding again on the way home. The crowd has dispersed somewhat. The dancing has begun. Someone is playing a lute poorly but with enthusiasm. A woman in a flower crown trips over her own hem and lands in a pie. Everyone cheers. No one notices you, which is, oddly, worse than being noticed. You consider standing at the edge, just for a moment, watching, smiling, even. But the last time you smiled at a public gathering, 3 people fainted, and the priest started speaking Latin very fast, so you decide against it. You keep walking. You keep being a shadow. You keep pretending that you don't mind. Your home is quiet. Your cat has knocked over a jar of leeches again. You clean it up with a rag that used to be a curtain and now smells permanently of antiseptic and mild despair. You reheat a crust of bread and consider adding something to it, but there's nothing left but the memory of sausage and the echo of bells. You sit. You chew. You try not to imagine what it would be like to be invited, to be wanted, to be someone people toast instead of avoid. You think, for one foolish second, about throwing your hood in the fire, about changing your name, about becoming something else entirely. Then you remember the goat still owes you a hood, and that tomorrow is gallows maintenance day. You wash your hands. You light a candle. You write guilt, minor, sausage in the corner of your journal, because it helps to keep track of these things. And then you sleep. Alone, uninvited, but full. The first verse reaches you around the corner, echoing off stone like something legally cursed. At first, you assume it's just another folk tune, perhaps the one about the cow who learned to read, or the merchant who married a frog. But then you hear your name, or rather, the title they've chosen for you, Mr. Choppy. It does not strike fear. It does not inspire respect. It sounds like the world's least successful pirate. You pause beside the baker's wall, pretending to examine a dent in your boot, though it's not so much a dent as the boot having given up entirely in the toe region. Around the corner the song continues, enthusiastic and slightly off-key, in that way only small children and inebriated monks can achieve. There are 3 of them, maybe 4, their voices weaving into a makeshift chorus of doom and joy. You peek just enough to confirm, yes, it's them again. The same gaggle of local offspring who once tied a ferret to your door with a note that read, "Is this your apprentice?" They are dancing. They are singing. They have, somehow, choreographed. The lyrics are not flattering. They begin with the line, "He comes for your head when you're late for your bread," which sets a tone. The next part rhymes doom with broom, and also implies that you sleep in a well. You don't. You sleep in a very modest, slightly damp cottage. Thank you. But the image is clearly catching on. One of them is holding a turnip. The turnip has your face. It's been carved with unsettling accuracy. The hood is there. So are the bags under the eyes. etched in with what must be a nail or a very determined beetle. The expression is somewhere between menacing and profoundly tired, which is, if you're honest, not far off from reality. They've even given it a tiny axe. It's made of sticks and spite. You don't know whether to be offended or flattered. You are both. The smallest child begins a solo verse. It includes a vivid description of your boots, your posture, and a rather graphic reinterpretation of your last public execution that includes dragons and the prisoner turning into a bag of potatoes. You were there. That didn't happen. But the audience seems captivated. You consider stepping into view, not to scare them, though, you admit, that would be a nice bonus, but to correct the narrative. Maybe explain that you do not, in fact, eat crows or drink moonlight or whisper curses into wells. You simply do your job. You follow orders. You try not to nick the collarbone. That's all. But you don't step out, because you know how this ends. They will scream. They will scatter. One will cry. One will laugh. One will defiantly offer you a flower and then run like they've summoned a demon. And the next day, there will be a new verse, possibly involving how your tears melt stone. Instead, you slink back the way you came. You do not cry, not because you're made of stone or stoicism, but because the last time you cried in public, it ended up in a limerick that still gets sung in the south end of town. At the butcher's, you buy meat you don't really need, just to feel useful. The butcher doesn't meet your eye, but does wrap your order in paper that smells faintly of thyme and fear. You thank him. He nods at your left shoulder. Progress. You take the long way home, past the old churchyard where no one sings. The tombstones are tilted like they're eavesdropping. A raven watches you from a crooked cross. You nod. It nods back. Mutual recognition. The wind moves through the grass like it's got somewhere better to be. At home, you set the meat down, unwrapped and unspectacular. You sit. You stare at the table. You hum the tune of the song, against your better judgment. It's catchy. It's terrible. It's about you. You wonder when exactly it became funny. When the hood stopped being a symbol and started being a punchline. When the weight of the axe turned into a prop in a child's play. When you, who once thought this job might carry some sliver of gravitas, might be sacred, even, became a story told at recess to make someone else drop their pie. You are not noble. You are not evil. You are necessary. But in a town where stories are easier to swallow than silence, no one wants the truth. They want the turnip, the rhyme, the shadows to be just spooky enough to laugh at before bedtime. The fire crackles. You warm your hands and imagine telling them your side. You'd start with the early mornings, the dull axe, the ceremonial robe that smells like mildew and dried panic. You'd talk about the part where you ask the condemned if they have any last words, and sometimes they just cry. Sometimes they tell jokes. Once, a man recited the entire menu of a bakery he used to frequent, and you still think about the way he described the raspberry tart. You'd tell them how your hands shake after, how your assistant, when he's not chasing ducks, sometimes puts a cup of something hot near you and doesn't speak for hours, how you clean your tools yourself, not out of pride, but because no one else will touch them. You'd tell them how you had a friend once, a real one, and how she stopped talking to you after you were assigned her cousin's case. You did your job. Clean, fast, no spectacle. It didn't matter. The fire pops. The meat cools. Outside, the night thickens. You lie down. You try not to hear the song again, but it loops anyway. He comes for your head when you're late for your bread. It's not fair. It's not kind. It's not even particularly accurate. But you hum it anyway, as sleep takes you, slow and stupid. You don't plan to go. You never plan to go. It just happens, like rain or nosebleeds or conversations with the magistrate. You find your feet leading you past the square, past the smithy, pass the tavern where the bard is currently singing a song called The Chopper's Curse. He lives in a pit, which you're trying very hard not to take personally. You pass the chapel. You pass the tree where once, long ago, you kissed someone whose name you no longer say out loud. You keep walking until the grass grows quiet and the air forgets to hum. The graveyard doesn't welcome you. It doesn't do anything so dramatic. It simply allows you to enter, which is all you can ask for these days. You don't visit specific names. You tried that once. It made everything worse. Now, you visit the space, the idea, the row of earth with stone teeth. You pick a spot near the center, close enough to the others to feel like company, far enough that you won't be accused of playing favorites. You sit. The ground is cold and damp, and it reminds your spine that your mattress is made of straw and regrets. You breathe. There is no ceremony here. No crowds. No sharp iron and expectation. The bones don't care what titles you hold. They've seen them all. Thieves, bakers, nobles. Once, the king's own cousin, who cried for his mother and died with his mouth open like a question mark. The dirt doesn't sort them by crime or coin, just by how long it takes them to stop whispering. You reach into your coat pocket and pull out the crust. It's stale and a little fuzzy at the edges, which you tell yourself adds to the symbolism. You place it gently on the nearest stone, not bothering to read the name. You whisper something, but it isn't words. Not really. More of a hum, like the start of a prayer you don't know how to finish. A dog appears. Where it comes from is unclear. Possibly the trees. Possibly the cracks in your dignity. It's medium-sized, covered in a coat that might have once been white before it rolled in every puddle between here and the mill. It trots up, sniffs the bread, looks at you, and then takes it in one deliberate bite. It doesn't run. It doesn't ask. It just eats, then sits beside you like it was invited. You nod. Fair enough. You don't pet it. You don't have that kind of relationship. It licks its paw and ignores you, which feels about right. You used to talk here, out loud, to the stones, to the sky, to the memory of people you tried very hard not to remember in too much detail. The talking didn't help, but it made the silence more bearable. Then one day you overheard a child daring another to sneak into the graveyard, to listen to the dead man whisper, and now you keep your mouth shut, just in case. The wind picks up. It smells like wet leaves and old iron, and something faintly sweet, like apples that never made it off the tree. You lean back on your elbows, watching the clouds try to outpace one another. You imagine telling someone that this is your favorite part of the job, the part where no one asks you to explain yourself. No one calls you names. No one demands entertainment. Just bones, and the grass growing over them. You think about the first person you executed. His hands didn't shake. Yours did. He looked at you like he was already halfway somewhere else. When it was done, someone cheered. Someone always does. You wonder if he's down there. You wonder if he remembers you. The dog sneezes, then starts digging half-heartedly at a patch of moss. You consider telling it to stop, but who are you to deny someone a little unearthing? Sometimes you think about writing a letter to the bishop, or the magistrate, or the universe. Something simple and poetic like, "I am tired," or "Please stop sending me cheese by mistake," or "Why do the ravens keep following me home?" You never do. You're not sure if anyone would answer. You're not sure you want them to. The church bell rings in the distance. A single clang, not the time bell, not a summons, just a reminder that the day still exists and is disappointed in your productivity. You make no effort to move. The dog yawns. You think maybe you'll stop doing this someday. The sitting, the crust leaving, the remembering. You tell yourself it's not healthy, that the living need you more, that your assistant is probably attempting to cook something flammable as you sit here philosophizing in a puddle. But you know you won't stop, because the bones don't ask anything of you, because the dog never looks disappointed, because the silence when it stretches just right, feels like something close to forgiveness. Eventually, you stand. The dog doesn't follow. It gives you a look that says, "This was adequate," and then goes back to rolling in something foul. You nod again, out of respect. You leave the way you came, boots squelching, cloak dragging damp behind you like an accusation. By the time you reach the edge of town, someone is already whispering your name and pretending it wasn't them. A woman pulls her child to the side of the road. A man spits. The bard starts a new verse. You don't stop walking. You don't look back. You'll be back tomorrow. Or not. The bones won't mind either way. The summons arrives, folded in thirds, and sealed with a wax blob that has aspirations of grandeur but mostly resembles a stepped-on beetle. You open it with the usual trepidation, expecting another petty thief or someone who insulted the wrong hat, but no. This one says, "Execution order. 1 chicken. Crime. Assault upon a nobleman of delicate ankle." You read it 3 times, then check the date, the sender, and your own pulse. All appear regrettably real. You consider pretending to be ill. You consider pretending to be dead. You consider lighting the scroll on fire and declaring it an act of divine intervention. Instead, you sigh, tuck it into your coat, and go to find a chicken-sized noose. The town square is already buzzing when you arrive. Apparently, word of the foul fugitive has spread with indecent speed. Children are laughing. Old women are knitting judgment into scarves. A boy is selling "I saw the chicken die" commemorative turnips. You try to ignore the bard, who is composing something that rhymes cluck with bad luck and will absolutely haunt your nightmares. You set up the scaffold. It's small, obviously, more of a raised platform with ambitions. You craft a stool out of a crate and tie a bit of string to a peg because it turns out no one makes official poultry execution ropes. Your assistant tries to help by painting a tiny target on the chopping block, but mostly he just spills red paint on his tunic and starts a rumor that he's a vampire. The accused arrives in a basket, carried by the village bailiff, with the solemnity of a man escorting a god disguised as poultry. The chicken is white, speckled, and disturbingly calm. It eyes you with something that feels like contempt and maybe mild tax fraud. You nod respectfully. It blinks. You clear your throat. The crowd hushes. You step forward, scroll in hand, and do your best to channel dignity. "This chicken," you announce, "has been charged with pecking the Honorable Sir Ulrich de la Featherstone upon the ankle." The injury was described as grievous. The nobleman reportedly wept. A snort from the crowd, possibly from someone who has met Sir Ulrich. "The law is clear," you continue, though it isn't. Not even a little. "All creatures who strike a noble must face judgment. Today, justice shall be served." In a poultry fashion, that was a mistake. The bard takes it as a prompt. You hear the lute tuning up behind you. You lift the chicken from its basket. It does not resist. It simply allows itself to be placed upon the block, like a scholar awaiting execution for knowing too much. You raise the axe, a small one, decorative, previously used to cut wheels of cheese and one unfortunate melon. You inhale. The chicken moves. It does not flutter or flail. It sidesteps, just enough. The axe hits wood. The block splits slightly. The crowd gasps. The chicken leaps from the scaffold and bolts into the crowd with a flurry of feathers and a sound that can only be described as defiant. Chaos. A woman screams. A man yells, "Get it!" and promptly trips over a barrel. Children scatter like startled pigeons. Your assistant dives after the chicken and lands in a cabbage cart. The bard is already halfway through a ballad titled "The Flight of Justice." You drop the axe and run. You chase the chicken through the market, past the pie stall, and the woman who always glares at you because her cousin married a thief you once beheaded. The chicken leads you through a maze of legs and baskets, under a cart, and into the church. You follow. Bad idea. Inside, the bishop is mid-sermon. You barrel past pews, knocking over a bucket of holy water. The chicken is perched on the altar, staring at you like it's prepared to give the final blessing. You take a step forward. It crows. Then it flies. Badly, erratically, miraculously. Out the stained glass window. You freeze. So does the bishop. He clears his throat and says, "Perhaps we should all reflect on the sanctity of life." You nod and leave before anyone asks for clarification. By dusk, you're back at home, boots muddy, dignity dented, and the official execution scroll now folded into a makeshift bookmark for your copy of Herbs for Hemorrhages and Other Party Tricks. You sit by the fire and consider your options. You could pretend the chicken never existed. You could blame sorcery. You could claim a vision from Saint Peculus, patron saint of livestock misdemeanors. The knock comes before you choose. It's the magistrate. He looks tired. He holds a new scroll. "Don't worry," he says. "This one's just a goat who insulted the Duke." You don't even ask. You just nod. And somewhere in the distance, a chicken sings. The nobleman requests an audience with you directly, which is already unsettling, as people usually prefer to avoid speaking to the person who will, within the week, remove their head. But not Lord Percival de Gloriana. No, Lord Percival sends a scented note, rosewater, and regret, and invites you to his estate for creative collaboration. You assume he means his will. You are wrong. You arrive in your best shirt, which is to say, your least stained shirt, and are ushered into a room filled with fabrics, silks, velvets, sequins. You try not to touch anything. Your hands are permanently calloused and suspiciously red, and everything here looks like it costs more than your entire childhood. Percival stands by the window, draped in a shawl that appears to be made of clouds and lies. He turns to you with a sigh so theatrical it leaves the room briefly winded. "Darling," he says, which you hope is rhetorical, "I wish to die beautifully." You wait. "I want music," he continues. "Candles, a poem, something with flair. This isn't just an ending, it's an exit." You begin to object, but he holds up one jeweled hand and whispers, "I have rehearsed. There is a script." You are handed the script. It is 10 pages long, half of which are stage directions, and the other half inexplicably rhyme blade with lemonade. You don't ask questions. You have long since learned that asking questions leads to long, rambling answers and people crying on your boots. The day of the performance arrives with the kind of overcast sky that thinks it's adding drama, but mostly adds mildew. You are given a costume. It is black, as expected, but shimmers in the light with sequins that spell out Finn. You are also given a hat with feathers, many feathers, an entire bird's worth of feathers, possibly 2. You don't argue. You simply put it on and try not to be seen. The scaffold is transformed. There are lanterns in pastel hues, petals scattered like sorrow. A small quartet plays something mournful on lutes, and you swear one of them is crying. The crowd is confused, but intrigued. This is new. This is theater. This is uncomfortable. Percival is led up in a cloak of midnight blue, a laurel crown on his head, and a face so serene it could win awards. He bows to the audience. They clap. You feel like the stagehand at the end of the world. You clear your throat and begin the pre-approved opening monologue. "Good people of the village square, I come to end a noble heir. He stole some jewels, then fled abroad, but now returns to meet his God." There is polite applause. You die inside just a little. Percival steps forward and recites his part, which includes a soliloquy about redemption, the nature of legacy, and a surprisingly graphic metaphor involving doves and soup. You nod solemnly throughout, though you aren't entirely sure if the bit about cleansing the sins from one's collarbones is theological or dermatological. At last, the music swells. You are cued to approach the block. You do so with exaggerated grace, because anything less would earn you another revision of the script. The axe, too, has been decorated. A ribbon trails from the handle like the world's least festive maypole. You raise the blade. You hesitate. Percival winks. You bring the axe down in a perfect arc, clean and precise, honed by years of doing this job under worse conditions and without musical accompaniment. The head falls with a gentle bounce. Someone gasps. Someone else faints. The music modulates into a softer key. You think it's in E minor. Then come the doves. You had forgotten about the doves. They are released from a cage behind the platform and take to the sky in a flurry of feathers and unintended symbolism. One lands on your shoulder. It poops on your sequins. The crowd applauds. You stand there, axe in hand, covered in glitter and bird droppings, listening to the murmur of appreciation like you've just delivered a particularly poignant soliloquy instead of severing a man's spine. A child throws flowers at your feet. Someone yells, "Encore," which is both impossible and deeply concerning. Backstage, if you can call it that, the magistrate offers you a handkerchief and a very serious look. "Well done," he says. "Very tasteful. A real improvement over last week's screaming fellow." You nod and return the handkerchief. It's embroidered with a unicorn. Later, you peel off the costume. It leaves glitter in places glitter should not be. You wash your hands 3 times and still smell roses. You sit by your fire in silence, staring into the flames and thinking about how you once believed this job was about justice, or maybe punishment, or at least something with dignity. Now it's dinner theater. A soft knock at the door. It's a messenger. Another nobleman. Another special request. This one wants interpretive dance. You consider faking your own death. You consider moving to the woods and marrying a tree. You nod. You take the scroll. You close the door. And you wonder, not for the first time, if this is how bards go mad. You recognize the name before they read it aloud, but you pretend you don't. That's the rule. Unspoken and airtight. You pretend the name is just ink on parchment and not someone who once pulled you out of a well or gave you the bigger half of a shared meat pie or sat beside you during a thunderstorm when you were too old to cry and too young to stop. It doesn't work. You recognize it anyway. It sits behind your eyes and makes a nest out of nerves. They tell you the crime. You nod at the appropriate moments. You do not ask questions, because the answers might make it worse, or worse. They might make it better. And then what? Then you'd have to reckon with the part where your friend is dying not because he was bad, but because the world island. So instead, you focus on your hands. Your hands have always been good at pretending. The day of the execution is overcast in the kind of way that doesn't promise rain but does seem to encourage brooding. The village is quieter than usual. No meat pie vendors, no juggler with questionable hygiene. No excited whispers. Just the sound of shoes on cobblestone and a hush that doesn't come from reverence, but from something heavier. Something with a name like grief, but sharper at the edges. You don't wear the sequined robe this time. You don't wear anything extra. Just the hood and the black tunic, and the weight of 100 Tuesdays spent doing what needed doing. The axe is sharp. You made sure of that yourself. You even wiped the handle clean, twice, as if the wood could tell the difference. He walks up to the platform without stumbling. You wish he would stumble. That would make this easier. But he looks at you with the same face that once grinned after daring you to eat a frog. And you remember the punchline before the joke starts. He doesn't say anything, just nods. You hate that nod. You go through the motions. You clear your throat. You announce his name and his crime in the same voice you use for all the others, but it comes out wrong. The words feel like gravel. The crowd listens. Some frown. A few avert their eyes. They know. Of course they know. The village isn't that big, and neither are secrets. He kneels. You raise the axe. He turns his head slightly and says, "Do it right. It's not a plea. It's not anger. It's not even fear. It's just a request. The kind made by someone who knows how the story ends and just wants the punctuation mark to be neat. You do it right. There's no second swing, no gasp, no dramatic collapse. Just a clean end, the kind you pride yourself on, but wish you never had to give again. Someone sighs. Someone else sniffles. You don't move. The priest comes over and touches your arm. It's a gentle thing, not a grip or a shove, just a reminder that you are still here and he is not. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. Later, you sit behind the scaffold and pull your hood off. You rarely do that in public, but the crowd's already gone, and the ravens know what your face looks like anyway. One of them hops closer and tilts its head. You toss it a crust. It takes it, but only after a long pause, as if even the birds know something has shifted. You stay there until the sky begins to dim. The wind picks up and brings the scent of lavender from the apothecary's garden. It smells wrong, too gentle for a day like this. When you finally stand, your knees crack and your shoulders ache. The axe is heavier than usual. Or maybe you are. You walk home the long way, past the bakery with the crooked door, the stream where he once slipped and blamed the fish, the alley where he carved your initials into stone because it was funny, not sentimental. You pass all of it, like a tour of something that doesn't quite exist anymore. That night, you do not eat. You try, but the bread tastes like dust and the stew doesn't taste like anything at all. You sit by the fire and listen to it pop and hiss and wonder if it's always sounded like that or if today has turned everything up too loud. You find the little wooden horse he carved for you years ago, shoved in a drawer beneath a pile of unpaid taxes and a sock that's never had a match. You hold it for a moment. It doesn't feel magical. It doesn't fix anything, but it's here, and he's not. And that's enough to make your throat feel strange. You do not cry. You are not allowed to cry, but you sit very still for a very long time. Eventually, you go to bed. You do not sleep. You don't expect to meet him. Executioners don't gather. You don't have guilds or conventions or cheerful luncheons where you compare axe handles and laugh over decapitation mishaps. You exist alone, the way mildew exists, or rumors. But then, one market day, as you're buying onions you don't need just to prove you're allowed to, you see him, hood half drawn, shoulders hunched, same gait as you, the walk of someone who knows people are watching but doesn't have the energy to perform menace. You know instantly, he's one of you. You follow him to the tavern. It feels illicit, like stalking a mirror. He sits at the far corner, away from the fire, away from the bard. You slide onto the bench opposite without asking, because what else do you do? Introduce yourself? Shake hands? Exchange business cards that read, "Specialist in Severance"? No, you just sit. He looks up. You nod. He nods back. That's enough. The first words are about rope. Of course they are. He says he hates the smell, that damp hemp reek of sweat and fear that clings to everything, even when you scrub until your fingers sting. You admit you hate it too, though you've spent years pretending not to notice. You talk about the way it burns your palms, the way it frays too soon, the way it lingers in your hair so long you start to think your skull must be made of twine. For the first time in years, you laugh. Not at yourself, not at the absurdity of everything, but with someone who understands. Then comes the bread. He confesses he dreams about loaves that crack softly instead of shattering, about crusts that don't slice the gums open. You tell him about your fantasy of butter that isn't a rumor. You both sit in silence for a while, staring into the middle distance, practically tasting softness that doesn't exist here. It's almost holy. He pulls a flask from his cloak and sets it on the table like a peace offering. The metal is dented, the cork chipped, but the contents burn in a way that feels clean, like it's scouring the inside of your chest. You pass it back and forth without words. The tavern swells with noise around you. Laughter, clinking, the bard attempting to rhyme justice with turnip, but the two of you are in your own orbit, spun together by the gravity of shared misfortune. He starts talking about his axe. He calls it Whisperfang, which you suspect is less its true name and more the kind of title you give a tool when you spend too much time alone. He insists it sings when it cuts through the air, a sound like monks chanting in a cavern. You raise an eyebrow. He doubles down, says villagers have written songs about it. You picture him swinging a regular rust-bitten axe and making humming noises with his mouth to cover the silence. But you don't call him on it. You let him have it. Everyone deserves a myth. In return, you tell him about the ravens. You describe how they follow you home, how they sit on your roof like black punctuation marks, how you sometimes throw scraps and pretend their caws are blessings instead of hunger. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't smirk. He just nods, as if to say, yes, that sounds right. Maybe we all need witnesses. The flask empties. Your head swims. You talk about the small things, the humiliations that no one else notices, how your hood never fits right, always sliding down when you need it most, how people make the sign of the cross if you sneeze, how no one invites you to christenings, though you are, technically, very experienced with ceremonies. He shares stories too, how his assistant once dropped the execution list into a latrine, how he once had to delay a hanging because the condemned man's trousers ripped and the crowd couldn't stop laughing. You nearly choke on air picturing it. For a moment, you both forget what your lives actually are. When you finally leave, the street is slick with rain. The lamps sputter. The two of you stand at the crossroads where the mud parts. One road toward your village, one toward his. You don't shake hands. You don't embrace. You don't even promise to meet again. But he lifts the empty flask in salute, and you do the same. Then you turn away. The walk home feels different. Not lighter, not easier, just less lonely. The rain doesn't sting quite as much. The houses don't glower quite as darkly. When you reach your door, you pause, listening to the dripping eaves, and for a second you almost imagine your own axe humming in its corner, not in song, but in recognition. You laugh at yourself. You shake your head. You step inside, but still, you don't put the thought away. It happens on a Tuesday, because of course it does. Tuesdays are built for failure, designed by some malevolent god who looked at the week and thought, let's slip a splinter right here. The scaffold smells of rain and nervous sweat. The prisoner is already weeping softly, a sound like a leaking roof, and you are trying very hard to remember the advice you once gave your assistant. Always check the grain of the wood before you trust it with a head. You had not, of course, followed your own advice. The axe feels fine in your hands as you lift it. Heavy, but the right kind of heavy. The kind that anchors instead of drags. The crowd leans forward. The priest mumbles something into his book. You breathe in, you swing down, and then crack. Not the clean kind. Not the kind you're trained to deliver. A dull, sharp, impossible crack that echoes like mockery. The axe stops dead in midair, jerks sideways, and the handle shatters beneath your palms. The blade clatters against the block with all the menace of a dropped spoon. For a heartbeat, everything freezes. Your arms are still poised as though the axe remains intact, and you stand there like a performer caught in an unfinished dance. The crowd gasps, then hushes, then roars as though they've seen the greatest act of theater this side of a saint's miracle. Someone claps. Someone else whistles. You're half expecting them to throw coins. The condemned prisoner, meanwhile, takes one look at the splintered weapon and faints clean away. His body slumps forward, head lolling like a puppet whose strings were cut. A faint cheer rises from the back row, because apparently unconsciousness counts as drama now. The priest closes his book and makes a sign in the air that looks suspiciously like, "Thank God." You don't move. You can't. You hold the broken pieces of wood in your hands, staring at them like a lover who just said, "It's not you, it's me," and pack their bags. The axe was supposed to be faithful, eternal, the one constant in your dismal parade of duties. And now here it lies, halved and useless, humiliated in front of strangers. The magistrate approaches, pats you once on the shoulder, and declares, "Well, that will do." He waves the crowd away, who shuffle off, buzzing about how they witnessed history. The bard is already improvising a new verse about the headsman's folly that will travel farther than your actual name. You gather the blade, the handle, the splinters, each piece as carefully as bones, and wrap them in your cloak as though concealing a wound. At home, you set the broken thing on the table and sit before it. 3 hours pass, but time means little. You stare, waiting for an explanation. Was it your fault? Did you swing too hard? Too fast? Was the wood cursed? Was this punishment for years of letting your thoughts wander while you worked? You half expect the axe to answer, to sigh, to say, "I gave you everything, and you never even oiled me properly." Biez Raider, you try to remember the first time you held it. How proud you were, how grown-up you felt with a tool meant only for endings. You named it, though you never told anyone. Whispered it in the dark like a prayer. You sharpened it until you could see your own reflection in the edge, sharp enough that it startled you as though you had conjured a double. And now? Now the reflection is jagged, fractured, nothing more than shards. You trace the crack with your fingertip and get a splinter. Of course you do. Your assistant pokes his head in once, sees the scene. Hood down, eyes fixed on broken wood, the air thick with something between mourning and vinegar, and wisely leaves without speaking. Even he knows this is sacred, or at least private. The fire dies low, shadows climb the walls. You still haven't moved. You think about repairing it, splicing the handle, binding it with twine or iron. But no. You know, once something breaks mid-swing, you never trust it again. That's the rule, isn't it? A cracked tool, a cracked promise. You'll have to get a new one, and yet the thought makes your chest tighten, as though you're betraying an oath. When you finally stand, your knees are stiff, your back sore, your eyes hot with exhaustion that you don't name. You lift the blade again, just the blade, heavy without its handle, raw and honest in its brokenness. You rest it against the wall in the corner. Tomorrow you'll figure out what comes next. Tomorrow you'll pretend this didn't shake you. Tomorrow you'll walk into the square with a new weapon, and the crowd will jeer or cheer or both, and the world will keep moving. But tonight, you sit back down, you pour yourself something strong, and you stare again, because it feels like the only respectful thing to do. It begins with the peaches. They arrive in your sleep, glowing like little suns hanging heavy on branches that bend just enough to be generous. You have never seen one, not really. Maybe once you glimpsed a nobleman's plate, where something orange and impossible gleamed among cuts of venison. But in the dream it's yours. The orchard is endless. You reach up, pluck one, feel the skin give way to your thumb, soft and warm. You bite, and the juice runs down your chin, sweet and reckless, staining your shirt in a way you don't even mind. You don't care about stains in the dream. You don't care about anything except the taste. Then you wake up. There's no peach. There's just your straw mattress and a splinter in your hand, and the faint trace of damp on your cheek that might be a tear or might be just the roof dripping again. You wipe it away and tell yourself it doesn't matter. You tell yourself you don't need peaches or orchards or sunlight that doesn't smell like smoke, but you keep dreaming anyway. The next morning you dig. Not deep, not like a grave, though the comparison gnaws at you. Just a little patch behind your hut, soil that looks more like powdered brick than anything nourishing. You use your old spade, the one you once tried to sharpen out of habit, and break the earth into clumps. It resists. The worms are absent, which feels like an omen. Still, you press on. You scatter some seeds, though you're not entirely sure what they are. Lentils? Cabbage? Weeds pretending to be useful? You don't care. You want something green, anything that doesn't bleed, The villagers notice. They always notice. They whisper when you pass, pointing at the dirt under your nails, as though it's proof you've finally cracked. Maybe they're right. Maybe the man who sharpens an axe every week can't be trusted with something fragile. Still, you keep watering your little plot with a jug that leaks more than it pours. You kneel in the muck until your knees ache. You mutter encouragement to sprouts that might just be stones. No one thanks you. No one jeers either. They're too baffled to bother. Nights become divided. Some bring the orchard again, endless and soft, where your hood is gone and your hands are clean. Others bring nothing but the square, the block, the dull thud of an axe that refuses to sing. You wake from both with the same ache, as though your chest is hollowed out and filled with something that isn't yours. You start leaving the hood on the chair instead of over your face at night, as though that small distance between you and it might invite sweeter dreams. One evening your assistant asks if you're ill. He gestures at the patch of ground, now sprouting something green and uncertain, and says, "That's not your job." You tell him you know. He doesn't argue. He just shrugs and sits beside you, plucking at the weeds with the same clumsy care he gives to feathers or rope. The two of you work in silence until the sun dips, and for a moment, just a thin moment, you feel almost like anyone else. The weeds grow taller. Some die. Some survive. You don't know their names, and maybe that's better. To name something is to give it weight, and weight is dangerous. You don't need more of it. You just need green. You just need proof that not everything you touch ends. One afternoon, a child wanders too close. Not one of the cruel singers, not one who mocks. Just a child, curious. They ask what you're growing. You don't know how to answer, so you shrug. They crouch, touch a leaf, and smile. It's the first time in years you've seen someone look at something near you without fear. When they leave, they don't run. They just walk. You sit there long after, staring at the spot where their small hand brushed a sprout, as though they consecrated it. The dreams persist. The peaches ripen. You imagine walking between rows, branches heavy, blossoms falling like soft confetti. Sometimes in the dream, you are alone. Sometimes others walk with you, faces blurred, voices soft. Not prisoners or priests or magistrates, just people. You give them fruit. They accept it. They smile. You wake with the taste still on your tongue, sweet and unreachable. Your garden does not give you peaches. It gives you weeds, coarse and stubborn, and a single crooked stalk that might one day pretend to be a bean. You tend it anyway. You water. You watch. You wait. Because it isn't about the harvest. It never was. It's about the trying, about the dirt under your nails, and the quiet at dusk, and the knowledge that, for once, you are coaxing life instead of cutting it short. One evening you sit on the stoop, looking at your little patch, and for the first time in years the ravens don't circle overhead. The air is still. The sprouts lean toward the last light. You breathe. You imagine the taste again. You let it linger. You hold it as though it might be real. And maybe that's enough. The order is read aloud, and the words don't make sense at first. They sit in the air, jagged and absurd, like someone has accidentally placed a joke in the middle of a sermon. You wait for the correction, the laugh, the no, not really. It doesn't come. The magistrate clears his throat. The scribe dips his pen. The crowd mutters with hungry anticipation. You stare at the prisoner, small and trembling, and the world tilts in a way you can't stomach. It is a child, or near enough, that it makes no difference. Someone who still has the roundness of baby fat in the cheeks. Someone who looks like they should be chasing geese, not facing an axe. The charge is thin, more rumor than truth. Stolen bread, or maybe just the audacity to look guilty when the baker's wife needed a story. You don't bother to untangle it. You only know that when you lift the axe this time, your arms will never come down again. They will simply hang there, Forever. You say no, not loudly, not with a roar of defiance, not in the style of those heroes in plays who toss swords aside and vow justice. Just a single word. Quiet. Flat. The kind of no that feels like dropping a stone into a well. No one moves at first. The magistrate frowns. The priest blinks. The crowd murmurs as though they've misheard. The scribe hesitates, pen hovering, unsure if he should record insubordination in the margins or strike it out as an error. You set the axe down, slowly, deliberately. The sound of wood against wood echoes, too loud, too final. You fold your arms across your chest, more to stop them shaking than to look imposing. You meet their eyes one by one. The priest, who shifts uncomfortably. The magistrate, who looks like he's swallowed a lemon whole. The crowd, who lean forward, scandal dripping from their lips. The prisoner stares at you with wide, wet eyes. Not thankful yet, not understanding, just shocked, like a deer that has wandered into a market square. You don't offer comfort. You're not sure you know how. You only hold their gaze long enough to let them know that something, for once, has broken in their favor. The magistrate clears his throat again, this time louder, a performance. If you will not, then someone else. He sputters, but the words falter. Because there is no one else. There is only you. The role cannot be reassigned with a snap of the fingers. It is your shadow, stitched too tightly to rip away. Everyone knows it. The silence grows. It is heavy, suffocating. Then, slowly, the magistrate waves his hand. Enough, he mutters, more to himself than anyone else. He dismisses the crowd. The priest closes his book with a snap that sounds like defeat. People shuffle, muttering, casting you glances filled with confusion, suspicion, even a trace of awe. The bard doesn't sing. Not this time. There's no melody to capture what just happened. You step down from the platform. No one stops you. You walk past the magistrate, who refuses to meet your eyes. Past the priest, who opens his mouth, then shuts it again. Past the crowd, who part like grass before a scythe. The prisoner is led away, still trembling, still unsure. Alive. That's all that matters. Back home, you sit at the table with your hood crumpled beside you, a black heap that looks less like authority and more like discarded cloth. You stare at it until the sun shifts and shadows stretch across the room. For the first time in years, you feel like a fraud. Or maybe you always were, and this was the first time you admitted it. You don't know. You only know that you are not the man they think you are. Not today. The hours crawl. You expect a knock at the door, a summons, an arrest. None comes. The world is quiet, as if unsure whether to punish you or forget you. You think of the prisoner's face, round and fragile, and you feel something you haven't in years. Relief, not triumph, not pride, not joy, just relief, plain and deep, like breathing air after nearly drowning. That night, you lie awake listening to the roof drip and the wind scratch against the shutters. You imagine the orchard again, peaches heavy on branches, but this time you don't pick one. You leave it there, untouched, just to exist. And when you wake, your chest is heavy but not hollow. You have not lost your job, but you do not feel like you have one either. You feel like someone else entirely, someone caught between two lives and belonging to neither. Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's unbearable. Maybe it's both. You don't know. All you know is the prisoner lives. And for once, that is enough. You don't plan it. You don't wake in the morning, stretch, and declare, "Today, I bare my face to the world." No. You simply leave the hood on its peg because it feels too heavy, too much like dragging yesterday around your neck. You step outside into the pale light, hair unkempt, face exposed, and the air tastes different, colder, sharper. as though the whole village is holding its breath. The cobblestones seem louder under your boots. You've walked this path 1,000 times, cloaked, veiled, hidden in fabric that blurred you into symbol. Now you are just a man with tired eyes and lines that no soap can scrub away. You tell yourself no one will notice. Of course they notice. The baker is the first. He stands in his doorway with flour up to his elbows, dusting the air like snow. He sees you and doesn't flinch, doesn't spit, doesn't make the sign of the cross. He simply nods once, a brief dip of the chin, like two farmers acknowledging the weather. You nod back, though your neck feels stiff. Your heart beats louder than it should for such a small thing. The miller is next. She's hauling a sack that looks heavier than She Island. She catches your gaze and looks away so quickly you'd think your face was a blade. Maybe at Island. She mutters something about grain and disappears into her shop. You don't mind. You've grown used to backs turning. But the sting lingers anyway, sharp and quiet, like a pebble in your boot. Then the little girl. She runs up from nowhere, skirts muddied, hair wild, clutching something clumsy in her fist. For a moment you brace yourself for a stone, a jeer, some cruel echo of the songs they've made about you. But no. She presses a flower into your hand, a daisy, slightly crushed, its stem bent, but still green. She beams, gap-toothed, waiting. You don't know what to do. Your hands are built for holding wood and steel, not petals. You've never been trained for softness, so you just hold it, very carefully, as though it might break under the weight of your calluses. She skips away. You stand there, the flower trembling between your fingers, absurd and holy. The crowd watches from the edges, some curious, some uneasy, some whispering, but no one laughs. Not yet. You walk on, slower now, because your hands feel clumsy and your chest feels strange, like someone has pried it open and stuffed sunlight inside. At the tavern door, the bard sees you. He stares a moment too long, as if memorizing the creases around your eyes, the scar on your jaw, the humanity he's never managed to put in his rhymes. For once, he doesn't sing. He looks away, strumming nonsense, and you pass without a verse at your back. You don't know whether to be grateful or disappointed. The market murmurs as you cross. A butcher pauses mid-cleaver. A seamstress drops a spool of thread. You hear someone say, "He looks tired," and another whisper, "He looks ordinary." Ordinary. You want to laugh. That word has never fit you, never even hovered near your shoulders. But here, under the open sky with a bent daisy in your hand, maybe ordinary isn't a curse. Maybe it's the closest thing to grace. By the time you reach the stream at the edge of the village, your shoulders ache from the stairs. You kneel, dip the flower into the water, washing off the dirt without tearing the fragile stem. You set it on the surface and watch it drift away, spinning lazily, bright against the dark current. For a moment you envy it. Light enough to float, untethered, unnamed. You head home as the sky dims, the hood still waiting on its peg like a question you've left unanswered. You don't put it on. You sit at the table with your empty hands and think about nods and glances and a child's offering. None of it fixes anything. None of it erases what you've done or what you will likely do again. But tonight, for the first time in longer than you can measure, you don't feel like a shadow. You feel like a man. The hood doesn't make a sound when you hang it up. You almost expect it to. Something final, a thud, a sigh, maybe even a laugh at your expense. But no, it just settles on the peg like any other piece of cloth, sagging under its own weight, smelling faintly of mildew, sweat, and 100 secrets you'll never tell. You step back, stare at it, wait for regret to rise like smoke. It doesn't. Not yet. Just quiet. The axe is trickier. You polish it one last time, not out of duty but out of something softer, like respect. Your hands know every notch, every scar on the blade, every splinter along the handle where you've gripped too hard. You run your thumb along the edge and find it duller than you'd like to admit. It has aged with you. You set it down gently, almost tenderly, against the wall, propped like a relic no one will worship. Then you step away, and it feels like walking away from a grave. Your days shrink without ceremony. No summons at dawn, no crowds waiting, no magistrate clearing his throat into eternity. Instead, you carve spoons. Badly. The wood splits more often than it curves. Handles snap. Bowls tilt at odd angles, making them better for spilling than for scooping. Still, you keep at it. The pile grows, a small forest of mistakes gathering in a basket by the fire. Sometimes you use them anyway. Soup tastes the same out of a crooked spoon, though you tell yourself it tastes better. The cat keeps you company. You never wanted a cat, but it just appeared one day, thin and sly, and refused to leave. Now it sits on your lap as if it owns the lease to your knees. You talk to it because someone should hear your voice. You tell it about the weather, about the dreams, about how you once almost married the blacksmith's daughter, but thought better of it because she laughed too loudly at funerals. The cat blinks, licks its paw, and ignores you. That feels fair. The ravens still come. They always do. You toss them scraps from your table, bread crusts, fish bones, a bit of cheese gone too sharp for your teeth. They gather on the roof and in the yard, black punctuation marks in a sentence no one else reads. You watch them, and sometimes they watch back. You imagine they know you better than most humans ever tried to. You imagine they've carried your secrets on their wings, scattered them across fields and forests, diluted enough to lose their sting. The village has not forgotten you, but it has moved on. A younger man swings the blade now, one with broader shoulders and less hesitation. You see him once at market, hood freshly dyed, voice steady as he bargains for onions. He doesn't notice you. Or maybe he does and chooses not to. You don't mind. It's easier this way. Let him be the shadow. You've had enough. One evening, as you sit outside with a bowl of soup and a spoon that leaks more than it serves, a boy wanders up, barefoot, face smudged with dirt, the kind of child who belongs to everyone and no one. He stares at you with the blunt curiosity of youth, no fear in his eyes, no hesitation in his step. "Were you really," he asks, "the man with the axe?" You pause. The soup cools in your lap. The cat flicks its tail. A raven croaks from the roof. The world waits. Sometimes, you say, it's the only answer that feels true. Not always, not never, just sometimes. A life folded into a single word, heavy enough to hold everything, light enough to let it go. The boy nods, satisfied, and runs off toward the square, where other children laugh and sing songs that may or may not be about you. You don't listen. You lift the crooked spoon to your lips, sip what's left, and let the warmth settle in your chest. The hood hangs behind you. The axe rests silent. The cat purrs, the ravens pick at the crumbs, and you go back to your soup.